Welcome everyone to this course on programming with generative AI. My name is Viraj Kumar. I'm a visiting professor at the Kotak IISc AIML Center at IISc Bangalore. Let's get started with a preview of this course. Now, you might be wondering, why should I take a course on programming with generative AI? I'm going to give you three reasons. Firstly, this course is industry aligned. What do I mean by that? Well, traditionally, I and many other professors have been teaching introductory programming courses where we give you simple, clear tasks, and we want you to develop the ability of translating that task into code. And before the wide availability of generative AI tools, this was an extremely important skill. Because this skill was very important, traditional programming courses emphasize developing your ability to write code. And you cannot write code without first understanding the syntax of that code, the precise meaning of technical terms and how they get used in the context of programming. Now that generative AI is increasingly being used in the industry, this emphasis is changing. And you don't have to take it from me that things are changing in the industry. Here, for example, is a report that NASSCOM recently released. And in this report, they say that increasingly people in the industry are using generative AI. And what are they using it for? For precisely this conversion process. As long as the task is clear and broken down into simple parts, today's generative AI, and by today, let me clarify, I'm recording this in early 2025, and the technology is improving quite rapidly. But at least today, in early 2025, if you give these generative AI systems simple, clear tasks, then they can convert that into code accurately. So then the question becomes, why should we be teaching students this skill? Our students can easily ask us, "Dear professor, this skill is not relevant in today's age where people are using generative AI." And we as instructors must respond to you. We must be able to give you a good answer to that excellent question. So this course is an attempt to give you a meaningful answer. What we are going to emphasize on is two things. Understanding the task, because it turns out real-world tasks are not simple and clear. So even in this introductory course, we will get familiar with dealing with tasks that are a little bit unclear, a little bit ambiguous. And we will understand what it takes for us as programmers to clarify the task. A very important skill that we will develop in this course is learning to ask clarifying questions. And when we ask clarifying questions, we will better understand the task. We will then use generative AI where appropriate to produce the code. This is not to say that this course is going to avoid focusing on code writing. We will do some amount of code writing. But if we are able to take a complex task and break it into simple enough components, and the tasks for those components are clearly specified, then we should be using generative AI. But we must not blindly trust the code that generative AI produces. So the other portion of this course that we will emphasize is critiquing AI-generated code. I'm going to give you an example of this very soon. So this is one reason for taking this course. The other reason is this course has a low floor and a high ceiling. We do not assume that you know any programming, we will start with a programming language that many people find easy to pick up, and one that is very popular, that is Python. Now, if you already know Python, that's great. You will find the early portions of this course quite easy to understand, but we are not going to assume that you know Python, so we will start from the very beginnings. Now, this is a fairly short course, and in this course, it is not possible for us to cover everything about a language as rich and complex as Python. So this course aims for a high ceiling. We will try and provide you a solid basis, but we will try and provide you with lots of interesting pathways in which you can explore further. I want to make it very clear that this course does not aim to be a complete introduction to Python. There will be many parts of Python that will not be covered in this course. The third reason why you might want to consider this course is it is research-based. As I said, many computer science educators, including me, are deeply interested in understanding what does it mean for students to learn how to program now that generative AI tools are available. So this course uses ideas that I have developed along with many of my research colleagues and students in the context of programming with generative AI. This word cloud gives you a rough sense of my research interests. Now let me give you a concrete example of what we are going to look at in this course. Here is a programming task that I would typically give my students before the availability of generative AI. I would tell my students to write a Python function. We will learn what that means. But this function is supposed to convert a given temperature in centigrade into Fahrenheit. Now, in school, you probably learned a formula for doing this. And if you don't know anything about Python, the skill that I would like you to develop is to take your understanding of how to solve this problem and express it in suitable Python syntax. But you and I both know that if you really had to solve this and you didn't know how to write Python, you could go to a generative AI tool, you could copy paste this into, say, ChatGPT, and ChatGPT would give you a solution. And this is where you as a student should ask me, why do you want me to develop this skill? If ChatGPT can produce this answer, and it turns out that this is actually quite a good answer, then why do you want me to do this? Well, it turns out, as I said, this is a good answer, but it's not a great answer. And I want you to develop these two abilities. Firstly, I want you to be able to stare at the given task very carefully, very critically, and ask, is there anything about this task that is incomplete or ambiguous? For example, when we have studied about temperature in our physics class, we learned that there is a notion of absolute zero. So you should be able to ask the following clarifying question. What if the temperature you give me is below absolute zero? That is not physically possible. The AI of today doesn't bother asking such clarifying questions. It just immediately jumps into producing a solution, and once we have learned to comprehend or read this code, we will realize that it does not even think about this question, what if the temperature was below absolute zero? I want us to develop this ability to ask good clarifying questions. And then I want us to be able to stare equally carefully and equally critically at the code that the AI has produced. In this case, as I said, the code is good, but it is not great. And in this course, we will learn how to write and design good quality functions. And we will be able to critique this code by saying, for example, that this code has no type hints. What are type hints? We will find out. And it has no doc strings and it has no doc tests. We will understand how these concepts are important in the design of good quality functions. The actual translation of the task, once it is well specified into code, at least for simple tasks, is very well accomplished by modern generative AI tools. And even for more complex tasks, the newer tools are getting quite good at this. So this is what this course is going to try and focus on. Now let me give you an outline of how we are going to proceed with this course on a week-by-week basis. Firstly, we're going to take a look at why generative AI is so good at many tasks, in particular the task of programming. And we will start our introduction into Python, firstly by understanding how Python represents and manipulates data. Then, in the next several weeks, we will focus on a very, very important skill. That important skill is decomposing complex tasks into simpler tasks. And we will do this in a variety of ways. Firstly, we will start with something quite simple. We will take a look at complicated expressions, which we will be able to simplify into a series of steps using what we call variables and assignment statements. Then we will solve simple problems by writing specialized functions such as the one we just saw. When we are writing functions, we will learn how to write them well. We will learn how to design good quality functions, and we will start our journey into critiquing AI-generated code. Sometimes we will find that AI-generated code is correct, but sometimes we will have to debug it. Now, how do we know that the code is correct or incorrect? One of the ways in which we will develop this ability is by writing test cases. We will check to see if the function does what we expect. As we write more complicated functions, we will see that it is useful to decompose a complex function into smaller helper functions, and we will understand how a complicated task can be decomposed into a series of simpler functions. Once again, those simpler functions could be so simple that AI can write an accurate solution for them. Now, one very important and special case of a helper function is a function that can help itself, and this is a beautiful idea in computing called recursion, and we will spend some time on this. Now, as we do this middle portion of the course, we will gradually see various parts of Python syntax, including conditional statements and then various types of Python data types, as well as iterations and exceptions. Once we have written code of significant complexity, we will find that even though we can read and comprehend all of it, we often reach a point where it is important to test this code thoroughly. And we will learn how to write high-quality tests. In the process, we will revisit this idea of making sure we have understood the task and making sure we have asked a sufficient number of questions to clarify that task. Not only is it important to understand the task, we will see that writing high-quality tests requires us to understand the code extremely well. Once we have done a significant amount of Python, we will try and learn a new language. Now, I could have spent this entire course focusing on Python, but the reason I want to introduce you to a new programming language is tomorrow, once you have become reasonably proficient as a programmer, you might wish to learn a new language. And I want you to realize that generative AI can help you in learning a new language. So we're going to test this idea, you and me, by trying to learn the C programming language. A very important point to keep in mind is that once we have got comfortable with certain ideas in one language, such as Python, we must not assume that those ideas translate exactly the same into the new language. So we will focus on understanding the key differences between Python and C. And then the other reason for taking you a little bit into C is to understand how the C programming language allows us to write code that is faster than code in Python. As an added bonus, a deeper understanding of C will allow us to demystify some aspects of Python. In particular, as we are learning about the Python data type lists, which are very popular, we will find that as Python programmers, some aspects of lists appear almost magical to us. By digging into the underlying C code, we will be able to unravel these mysteries. While we are doing this last week, we will also introduce some very important ideas involving writing high-performance code, including a brief look at profilers. So I hope you find this journey exciting. We are looking forward to working with you and enhancing your understanding. Working with generative AI is going to be an important part of your professional life, and let's start that journey together right now.